good morning, good day, good afternoon, because I think it's already afternoon or maybe even evening for some of you. I'm not sure if I have my time zone calculation right in my head. Welcome to this webinar focused on N4G commitment making, focused on really what's the commitment making happening at country level. We're so delighted to see so many of you on the line already today, and I think more people are coming in as we speak. My name is Marie Durling. I'm a partnership officer at the WellFit program in the nutrition division, and I'll be moderating the session today. The session is mainly dedicated really to the questions that you have and the discussions you want to have related to country commitment making. So the session is organized by jointly by the Nutrition for Growth outreach group, which has been set up by the government of Japan to support country commitment making and ensure that this is really a collaborative, coordinated process as much as possible, and supporting this process as it takes place over the next few weeks leading up to the summit. And this group is a number of actors coming together. It includes the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, FCDO, the Global Nutrition Report, the Sun Movement Secretariat, UNICEF, UN Nutrition, the World Bank, World Food Program, WHO, USAID, and also 1,000 Days on behalf of the civil society constituency. So this is really a joint effort, and we have on the line with us today representative from across that group, and between us we're covering the 4 different seminars, because there are 4 seminars, as you might have seen, webinars that are targeted to different time zones and language groups to ensure that we provide this opportunity for as many people as possible in a way that works. So this is the first one in this series. So we're testing out the concept, and we'll see how we can make the most of this time we have together. So the session objectives really is to provide this opportunity to discuss Nutrition for Growth commitment making and registration in a bit more detail. As we have started engaging with many of you in various ways, whether you represent governments or civil society or the UN or other groups. We've been receiving a lot of feedback and some questions regarding the more kind of detailed process and how it works, what's a smart commitment, how to register, how to use the platform, and other questions that might come up. And we really wanted to provide an opportunity to discuss this in a bit more detail. So that is really the main objective of today. So we'll focus on registration process because we've received a lot of comments on that. We will focus also on finance commitments because we also received a lot of questions there. And looking at the, and we'll also provide an opportunity to hear any feedback that you might have and any other questions related to the process. Looking more closely at, and I think we have today on the line that many of you are involved in various ways in those conversations at country level, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. So I see that some of you have already started introducing yourself. I think that's brilliant. So definitely we encourage all of you to use the chat to just plug in who you are, who you're representing, which country you come from, because that really is interesting for us to see who is on the line. And that's also generally interesting for everyone else to see who else is working on those issues. So thanks everyone for already doing that without even being encouraged. So thanks so much. So looking at the agenda today, we will start with a welcome message from the Governor of Japan, and then we will have 2 presentations. One from the Global Nutrition Report, looking at really the nitty-gritty of the registration process, because we know that is something which many people have asked questions about. And then we will have a presentation on financial commitments by the World Bank, with the Global Nutrition Report supporting. And then we really dedicate the bulk of this session to discuss. So this is really the opportunity for everyone to come ready to give any questions that you might have. We're here to respond in the best way we can. We have a Q&A function on the Zoom, which I think at this point, after a year and a half into the pandemic, we're all more or less familiar with using that function, but there is a chat function and there is a Q&A function. So we'll be able to use that. Of course, you'll also be very welcome to also actually seek out your questions so we can have a bit of a discussion. So both versions are good. So we'll dedicate a good kind of half an hour to that. And then we have towards the end, the Sun Movement coordinator, Gerda Verberg, will come in to give some closing remarks. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We have dedicated an hour, as I said, to the session, but if needed, we're happy to stay on for another half hour if there are more questions or comments or also areas that you might want to share. We're very welcome to, we're staying on the line if needed, but we thought let's keep it at 1 hour because we know already it's late in some parts of the world and people might have other things to go to, but we're happy to stay on the line if needed. And also, of course, the usual things, please stay on mute when you're not speaking, but that seems to be already working, so actually no need to even say that. And yeah, before coming in on the in the discussion part, please also introduce yourself when you're speaking, so we know where the question or comment is coming from. So I think we're ready to go with the first proper agenda point, which is this brief welcome message from the Governor of Japan. So we will listen to the welcome message. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your joining this regional webinar on the Tokyo Nutrition for Growth Summit 2021. At the turning point towards the World Health Assembly nutrition targets in 2025 and the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030, the Tokyo N4G comes at a critical time. Following the UN Food Systems Summit, the Tokyo N4G will welcome nutrition-related commitments, including those linked to food, health, and social protection systems at the capstone moment in December 2021. The Tokyo N4G is a key opportunity to renew political momentum, mobilize additional funding, and accelerate action for ending all forms of malnutrition. I hope that the summit can help revitalize ownership of the nutrition agenda at the highest political level and be an occasion for renewed alignment between nutrition stakeholders at national level. This is an opportunity to bring nutrition stakeholders together to jointly review progress and bottlenecks on implementing national nutrition plans, as well as to identify areas where further action is needed. The Tokyo N4G Secretariat have provided a comprehensive commitment guide for all stakeholders. It gives you concrete guidance of how to develop a commitment. This is guided by the SMART criteria: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I hope this would be helpful to you to make your own commitment for better nutrition. Last but not least, I appreciate strong leadership of relevant partners and stakeholders, including donors, UN agencies, businesses, civil society, the Sun Movement, and the Global Nutrition Report to help other partners to make commitments so that Nutrition for the Growth be a truly successful event with maximum impact in order to improve global nutrition. I hope you all find this webinar productive and engaging. I look forward to welcoming you to the Tokyo N4G with your ambitious commitments to fight all forms of malnutrition. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the Governor of Japan for that inspiring message. So now we will hear our first presentation from the Global Nutrition Report, who are in charge of N4G commitment, registration, and also accountability. So we're very happy to have with us today Renata Mischa from the GNR Independent Expert Group and Giacomo Zanello, a member of the Independent Expert Group. The floor is yours. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, I'm the chair of the Independent Expert Group for the Global Nutrition Report, and I'm delighted to present to you all today with my colleague, the Nutrition Accountability Framework, which is the first independent and comprehensive framework for registering smart nutrition commitments and monitoring nutrition action. I will go first to give you an overview of the bigger picture and why it's critical to ensure and commit to accountability for nutrition, followed by a brief introduction on the Nutrition Accountability Framework and its role. And then I will pass it over to my colleague, Giacomo, to cover how to register commitments in more detail. So before we go into the Nutrition Accountability Framework, we need to remind ourselves of the global nutrition situation. This will not come as a surprise to anyone. We're faced with a global nutrition crisis, which we can no longer ignore. 1 in 9 people are hungry or undernourished, and 1 in 3 adults are overweight or obese. As a result of the pandemic, malnutrition and related deaths are projected to increase. Food insecurity has been exacerbated and will have a lasting impact on children and adults. We're also seeing the additional impacts of worsening climate change. The need for more equitable and sustainable systems has never been more urgent. So one of the key challenges in addressing this global crisis is the lack of accountability. Accountability, as we've defined it for our purposes, is the obligation of stakeholders to answer for their actions and to accept responsibility for them. Accountability ensures that actions, decisions, programs, and policies of stakeholders are implemented, they meet their stated objectives, and they also respond to the communities they aim to benefit. Lack of accountability is one of the reasons we aren't meeting any of the global targets. To give you an example, a first challenge is the formulation of the commitments. In past summits, we have received commitments or political statements, certainly made with good intent, but not possible to track or measure their impact, which means it's not possible to transform into measurable action. The Nutrition Accountability Framework addresses this challenge by providing clear guidance to formulate smart commitments. A second challenge is the reporting burden on commitment makers. We're very well aware of the current burden you all face, and we want to address that. Over time, we will leverage other reporting mechanisms to ensure that reporting on nutrition action is clear and as streamlined as possible. Stronger accountability will translate commitments into action and impact. So accountability is everyone's business, and by working on it together, we have the opportunity to improve it. The need to address accountability, of course, is not new. The GNR was born out of a commitment made in the first N4G Summit to drive forward global nutrition accountability. But given it was born after the summit and after commitments were made, it had not been possible at the time to introduce accountability guidance ahead of the summit and to help shape and formulate commitments. At this point, of course, I would like to give credit to the government of Japan, because this is the first time a government leader is stepping up and makes accountability a requirement. Government of Japan, as you've all heard, calls for strong commitments, smart commitments that will have an impact. For the first time, we have an emphasis on the quality of the commitments. Quantity alone is not a marker of success. So we want to see strong commitments translate into much needed impact. The support from the government of Japan and the nutrition community has led the IG to develop a framework driven by excellence, a framework that is inclusive of all groups of stakeholders and across all geographies, highlights success stories, reflects best practice, and provides an equal opportunity for all stakeholders to be recognized for their actions. The GNR, through the work of the framework, comes to address this lack of comprehensive accountability for nutrition and to support the shared vision of tackling poor diets and malnutrition in all its forms. It can't happen without your collaboration and engagement, of course, and we wish to further build this framework that is independent, fair, and transparent, and that will provide you with the tools to make stronger nutrition commitments, so to better serve your needs. This means that we all need to work harder and in partnership, but given this global nutrition crisis we're faced with, it's a much needed investment. So this is our opportunity to change things. With the year of action, the Tokyo N4G Summit ahead of us, following the momentum created at the Food Systems Summit, this is our opportunity your opportunity to make strong nutrition commitments and drive nutrition action forward. And for this to be a real turning point for nutrition, we need to show that your commitments are not simply promises. So the Nutrition Accountability Framework will drive nutrition action and accelerate progress, and critically measure how commitments translate into impact. It is redefining how nutrition commitments should get tracked, and has created a common system, language, and principles to unify monitoring and accountability of nutrition action on a global scale. We are inviting all stakeholders around the world to make smart commitments to tackle poor diets and malnutrition in all its forms. Stakeholders are strongly encouraged to use this framework to register and report on their nutrition commitments. Stakeholders such as country governments, donors, including philanthropic organizations, civil society organizations, from global NGOs to local charities and community groups, multilateral organizations such as the UN and the World Bank, the private sector, including, of course, food and non-food businesses, academic and research institutions, as well as the general public or advocacy groups. So how does this framework work in practice? This visual shows you the full cycle of the Nutrition Accountability Framework, from commitment formulation to seeing impact and taking more action. Starting from the upper left corner, and I won't go into all of these details, of course, but just to give you a high-level overview, first, you develop your commitment, and this is why we're here today, to help you formulate smart nutrition commitments. You can then register your commitment using the online platform, and Giacomo will speak about the resources available to you to facilitate that process in a few minutes. Once you have registered your commitment, this is our turn to review how smart it is. We would follow a rigorous, transparent, and fair methodology to review each commitment and help improve it. Our objective is to work with you to fine-tune the level of detail provided to enable monitoring and annual reporting. No commitment will be made public before the Tokyo N4G Summit. Then it will be part of the compact, and we will then release it on the GNR website. On an annual basis, you will be required to report on your progress made towards your commitment using our online platform. We will then review the progress made, analyze, and report on it. The objective is to celebrate success, identify gaps in action, and share recommendations. Through that process, of course, you will receive recognition for all of your efforts, learn and further strengthen existing commitments, or make new commitments and take more action. So this is how the cycle then repeats itself, leading to more action and more commitments being made. So thank you for your attention so far. I will now hand it over to my colleague, Giacomo, who will show you how to register a commitment using our platform. Thank you, and over to you, Giacomo.
Thank you, Renata. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giacomo Zanello. I'm a member of the GNR Independent Expert Group. In the next few minutes, I will show you a short video about how to access the platform and register your commitment. I will remind ourselves what we mean by smart nutrition commitment, providing you also a couple of examples. And finally, I will provide you a list of resources that are available to all of you on our website. Here we can see a short version of a demonstration that you can find in the GNR website that show you the different steps from the sign it up, sign in, and register a commitment using the platform. In order to access to the platform, you must first sign up for an account. From the Global Nutrition Report website, there is a section, the Nutrition Accountability Framework section, and then scroll until you see the two sign up and sign in buttons. The sign up button is where you can sign up for an account, and sign in is where you register your commitment. First, you sign up. What it is? It's a registration form where it will be asked details about the organization and contact details of an authorized representative. I already have an account, so in the screen you will see that we can already sign in. Here is where you can register commitment. after signing up for an account. If you scroll down, you might download the form if you would like to view that in advance. And then you can then begin the survey. As I mentioned, this is a very short snapshot. I encourage all of you to look at the full video that is available online, which will provide you an overview of the different steps. How to make then a commitment smart? The meaning of each letter of the acronym is well known to you all, but we recognize that applying it to a nutrition commitment is not necessarily straightforward. Therefore, we have developed a document which we call the Smartness of Nutrition Commitment to explain in detail what we mean by smart nutrition commitment. We have identified and defined criteria that we will use to assess whether nutrition commitments meet the requirements to be considered smart. For example, starting from specific, we want to know who is accountable for the commitment, the number and description of the measurable goal that a commitment might have, the type of each goal. We have developed a nutrition action system to help you to determine the type of action you refer to. We will also ask information about the action plan that we will be followed to achieve each goal, the geographical coverage, and the target population. Is your commitment measurable? We would like to know the primary indicator, the baseline and end line with the milestone, and whether there is a monitoring evaluation plan in place or reporting mechanism. To determine if a commitment is achievable, have you estimated the total cost associated with the delivery and identify the financial resources to cover the cost? For references, we will look if the commitment, for relevance, we will look if the commitment is aligned with global nutrition targets on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition and diet-related non-communicable diseases. Additional requirements can be checked, for example, for the Tokyo N4G Summit. In addition to the smartness, commitment should align with national nutrition plans. And finally, we also look at the thematic area and the link with the COVID-19 response. Final component of the smartness is the time bound, in which we will want to know when the commitment starts and ends. Let me give you a couple of examples that show in practice a smart commitment and a non-smart commitment. The first one shows a non-smart commitment. It's not very specific. We only know who is making the commitment. We do not know anything about the goal, the action plan, and the geographical coverage. It's not really measurable. There are not indications on any indicator that is using to measure the progress of the commitment. Is not really achievable. There are not information on the cost related to the commitment. And is it irrelevant? We do not have enough information to assess that. In general, it's a quite vague commitment, but it needs more ingredients to make sure that we understand, for example, that really is able to achieve what he aims to achieve. That malnutrition has many forms, and we do not know what is trying to achieve. Who is targeted, for example, the target population is not explained, or the baseline for any target indicator. That provides us not indication on how to effectively track the commitment. The second example is an example of a smart commitment, a good example of it. Using the SMART criteria, we can see that is specific. We know who will be accountable. We know that there are two goals: reduce the prevalence of obesity in adults and reduce the prevalence of overweight in children under 5. We know how can be measured. There are indicators for both goals with baseline and targets. We know whether it's achievable, since we know the total cost associated with the commitment, and we know how much has been secured out of the total cost. All this not specify the relevance. We know that those targets, the target of reducing the prevalence of obesity in adults and reducing the prevalence in overweight in children, are global target for overweight and obesity. And then it's time bound. We have a clearly defined period starting date and a date for both goals. We have used an example of reducing overweight and obesity, but is applicable to any commitment that targeting all form of malnutrition or financial commitment. Using the Nutrition Accountability Framework registration form will support you in formulating a strong commitment. And the form is very much designed to support you designing and formulating smart commitment. I encourage you to have a look at the website. You will find more resources to read, additional guidance, and the FAQ that we update and as we receive more feedback. We will also provide you an example of 7 different commitments that can be downloaded. Those are examples, but you might get an idea of the level of details that we are looking for commitment, and that might help you to define and compile the form for your commitment. This is everything for me. Thank you very much for your attention. The slideshow will be shared with you, and you will be access to all the links. And we will look forward to any question you may have later.
Thank you so much, Renata and Giacomo. This is super helpful presentation. And I see already that there are some questions that are starting to come in. As we will have one more presentation, I will ask you to hang on to your questions for just another few minutes, and then we will really launch into a full discussion mode. But please feel free to already now, as some of you have already done, starting to plug in questions into the Q&A box, because then our panel here can already start preparing to respond to those. So thank you so much. So we will now hear from Kyoko Okamura, nutrition specialist at the World Bank. She has, it's very, very early in the morning for her. So we're very, very thankful for her for getting up at 4 to be here to present to us today. Kyoko, you have the floor, looking into the financial commitments and for us to discuss that in a bit more detail. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I had actually a really good discussion with our Indonesia team on this commitment making last night at 9 p.m. DC time. And I'm up here. I'm very committed to this commitment making process. So let me talk about briefly about the financial commitment and finance-related policy commitments, because these are the things that come together when you work on different thematic areas. I will skip some of the points here because it has been covered by Renata. Just make 2 points that Tokyo N4G Summit will secure new and refreshed policy and financial commitments to tackle malnutrition in all its forms, because the previous summit's commitments were to expire in 2020, which was the original date for the summit. The other point is that the key focus of this summit's financial commitment is more effective and sustainable financing for nutrition. We must work together, and each of us has to really keep in mind that our work is towards realizing the mantra of more money for nutrition and more nutrition outcomes for the money spent. So what do we mean by that? The first half of the mantra is about more money for nutrition. Given the the precariousness of the current moment and the dire need for sustainable financing for nutrition, not to be again found left behind at the end of the SDG era, it is really critical to leverage additional resources from domestic budgets, donor partners, private investors, and innovative mechanisms and sources. And what are the key elements in this financing mantra? Domestic financing for nutrition is critical and represents the largest part of the total resource needs. And at the global level, nutrition financing also comes from various stakeholders, such as bilateral and multilateral donors, and they are aligned behind countries' nutrition priorities. And existing global catalytic financing mechanisms that contribute to nutrition, such as GFF, Power of Nutrition, Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, etc., can be strengthened to help improve the nutrition financing landscape. And new mechanisms need to be explored too, to increase and further leverage domestic and donor financing. The other half of the mantra is to make nutrition financing more effective, efficient, and sustainable. This requires strong focus on post-N4G actions on analytics, system building, and capacity strengthening for nutrition financing, and making both financiers and implementers accountable to the results through nutrition responsible public financial management. These are big words. How do we actually move towards that vision? Many countries already have a costed national nutrition plan, and some countries have moved on to develop subnational plans that are based on subnational data and evidence. And once costed, the budget should be allocated more efficiently to maximize the impact, which analytical tools such as Optima Nutrition can help. The budget analysis that SAN Secretariat has been supporting in many countries can also support the evaluation of budget allocation. The allocated budget needs to be spent efficiently and effectively. So in addition to budget analysis, several countries have conducted or are conducting analysis on budget execution through public expenditure reviews that focus on multi-sectoral nutrition investments. In many countries, house public expenditure reviews are done, but for nutrition, it has to be multi-sectoral, and it requires a lot of coordination. And public expenditure reviews are, however, quite heavy lifting. So it can build a robust baseline. Many countries have found it's challenging to repeat it periodically. So with this caveat, some countries like Indonesia, Pakistan, and Rwanda have moved on to the next step of developing a nutrition expenditure tracking system within their existing financial management information system. So these actions all build on a strong program and financial data systems, which is a very important investment area, as we tend to fly blind without even knowing how much has actually been spent for nutrition in a country. Sustainability in financing cannot be achieved without these system investments. The next one, please. So the formulation of N4G commitments should really take into account of what you really aim to achieve for the future of the country and what needs to be done to get there. This slide shows examples of financial commitments and financial related policy commitments that you can also find in the N4G commitment making guide. Financial commitments have to be smart and have to reflect your vision and actions rather than a ballpark, empty kind of numeric number. This summit really expects more governments and stakeholders to be able to, more governments to be able to commit domestic resource allocations and partners to fully support that effort, and all of us to be accountable, which requires ambitious enough financial commitments and mechanisms to make us be able to accountable through system, and capacity building investments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyoko, for this super helpful presentation. That's very clear. And I'm sure that many of you might also have follow-up questions on the financial part. So now we will move into the discussion part of this webinar. And I see that many of you have already started pasting questions in the chat box. And I see that Charlotte from the Global Nutrition Report has already started responding. But I think to kick things off, that we will just read out very quickly. I'll just read out the questions that have already come in and also let Charlotte just respond to those quickly so that everyone can benefit from hearing those, because I think some of those are really something which many people might have questions to. So just going into what has already been responded to. So there is one question that came in, and I'm not sure from whom. If government ministries can send separate commitments coming from different ministries, for example, from health, agriculture, and social welfare. Would you like to come in, Charlotte, just to explain the answer that you already gave in the chat, just very briefly?
Yes, sure. I mean, I'm speaking under the control of Giacomo and Renata here, but the form technically enables different departments to make different commitments. However, it is recommended that efforts are coordinated at country level with the different departments of the same government, as well as with the other stakeholders. And what can be done is to have an overall commitment and different goals for each department if they feed into one commitment.
And yes, if I may, thank you, Charlotte, for that, if I may add to that. So yes, the form does allow country governments at any administrative level to make commitments, either separated or joint, as Charlotte mentioned. So how the commitment gets formulated and what constitutes one commitment versus multiple commitment, it really comes down to the stakeholder, the commitment maker, and how they define that. For example, a country government could also be a donor government. So that may come from a different department, and that could be a separate commitment from the same country. So that really depends on the commitment and the different agencies or department from a given country, but the form does allow either a combined commitment or separate commitments by different government levels, I guess.
Thank you so much. That's very clear. So preference is really to make a kind of joint commitment if possible, but it's also, there is some flexibility because we know that every context is different. So there is also a question asking if there is a particular space in the form where you can specify risk and assumptions that need to hold for the commitment to be achieved as planned. Charlotte, did you want to come in quickly on that one?
Yeah, so my understanding is that there is no specific space, but commitment makers are welcome to mention those in the formulation of their commitment. In addition, at the end of the form, there is a space for additional feedback or information that they deem necessary to give. So we would encourage them to add those assumptions there so that it enables the full analysis of the commitment.
And then we have one question which I think is very clear, but there might be others that need to hear that as well. So it's from the Sun Civil Society Alliance in Vietnam, saying that they submitted commitment already in June 2021, but haven't heard back yet from the GNR team. And essentially the GNR team is just saying that they will revert as soon as possible. So that is coming, and that dialogue will be there. So that's well noted. If others have done similarly, already submitted something, feel free to flag that as well. And I'm sure that the team can come in. Renata, please come in.
Just to add to that, so that registration, I'm assuming that they've registered their commitment using the prior form, the Google form that was available online. We did email everybody over the summer. Hopefully you've received that email. If not, please let us know that once we've launched the new registration platform, which has now been launched, we will go through it, review it, and make sure that we convert it to the new form as much as we can. So we're currently doing that process for everybody that submitted a commitment using the past form, and we're identifying, I guess, either missing information. So we should be able to get back to you this month, I guess, with any additional clarifications that are missing, but we are converting into the new form before getting back to you so that we minimize any additional burden on your part.
Thank you so much for that. So if people want to come in and actually explain their questions so that it will become even more clear. So we have one from Nurul Azma. If you want to come in to actually explain your question in a bit more detail, then we can also hear from you. That'd be great. Ah, okay. Okay, we actually don't, okay, I didn't realize that there is no function for attendees to speak. So then that would be more complicated. So sorry for that. That was me not being clear on the technicalities of this. So I'm happy to read out the question, sorry for that. So the questions is about if in a commitment, if there is a more than 5 additional stakeholders, what to do then? And then a question also, like some quite detailed questions about using the form, how that is working out, and also what the definition of programmatic is in the goal type. And wondering also about which part which will be reported and tracked in DNR. All parts of the commitment or just the goal and goal indicator. So very happy to hear, because that is quite technical. But at least the kind of big lines in that response, if colleagues from the GNR wants to come in.
I think Sharon has covered that in great detail, but just to make some points in terms of well, first of all, congratulations if you have more than 5 stakeholders coming together to make a commitment. And then the online form, there's dependencies between the fields. In the PDF, of course, that's not visible, but once you do select a certain field, if something is not applicable, it will no longer appear when you go through the online process. So Charlotte has responded to each of the questions one by one. In terms of how to best define your goal, that really comes down to what this is for and meant to capture. There is guidance in the commitment making guide that was mentioned at the beginning, I guess, in terms of examples that can be used to help you identify whether it's policy or programmatic or impact commitment. And what we will be tracking, we'll be mainly tracking, of course, the indicator that is used to measure progress against, but also as a whole. We will have plans to announce on how exactly progress will be tracked and assessed, hopefully early next year. But whatever information is being collected right now ensures, 1, that the commitment is smart, and 2, that it can be tracked using the information and the indicators that you provide. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. So we have questions coming in, which is excellent. So we have one question from Karima Al-Hada from Sun in Yemen. If there are specific thematic areas of commitments for countries in humanitarian and conflict settings. So Charlotte, I see you're already typing, but please come in and give that response orally. That would be excellent.
Yes, sure. So at the moment, what happens is that the commitments will be assigned to the 5 thematic areas of the N4G Summit if the commitment maker links his commitment to the N4G Summit. So these are the thematic areas, the ones that we know: health, diet, resilience, accountability, and finance. However, if a commitment is really specifically in the setting of humanitarian and conflict affected settings, it can be interesting to add that as a note in the additional space at the end of the form, because later on, when the IG makes a full analysis, they can use this information.
And just to add to that, I guess, as part of specifying your goals and the target population, that should become evident what it is that this specific commitment aims to address and in which setting and for what population. So hopefully all that information will come up as you're completing the different fields. And then there are different ways that commitments can be analyzed and presented. Yes, for the N4G Summit, these are the thematic areas, but that doesn't mean that we'll disregard that information and wouldn't leverage to then further analyze, as say, commitments that are made in specific settings or for specific populations or even for specific forms of malnutrition separately. So the more information you provide, of course, the better it is, but that information specifically should ideally come up as part of defining each of the ingredients that Giacomo presented earlier. If anything else additional that you don't feel gets covered by any of those fields, then there's this blanket general kind of additional information field that allows you to provide any further information that you think is relevant and important for us to take into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And I think at an overarching level as well, I mean, of course, the kind of resilience thematic will be specifically, relevant for countries in fragile situations, conflict situations. But of course, it's also possible to kind of make other commitments looking at health or looking at food systems, for example. But then how they will be tracked and allocated is you just heard about that. But it's not limited to that, but it can also look into those other thematics. So we're also hearing another question regarding if the commitment registration form can be downloaded without signing up. So that's a relatively straightforward question. Over to you, colleagues.
Yes, it is absolutely possible. You don't need to sign up for an account to access any of the resources that are available on the website.
Great. So we have two financial questions here. One is from Nang Lianzar, if it is okay if financial commitments is overlapped from donors and implementing agencies at the same time. Okay, now that it disappeared as I was reading it. It went to the answered, I think. So that's one question. Gosh, it disappeared from my screen. Yeah. And then there is another question if that budget commitments are far below disbursement, what can be done to improve disbursement? So we might take two questions at the same time that relates to finance. So maybe, I don't know, Kyoko, if you want to come in there and maybe GNR colleagues as well.
Yes, thank you for those really important questions. The overlap is an issue. I think GNR team can also, provide the technical guidance in this. But in general, when you are actually committing the financial figure, including donor commitments, including IDA and IBRD, the World Bank financing, that it's quite a large amount, a large proportion of the government commitment in many cases. You have to specify that so that we don't double count on the other side. So we try not to double count as much as possible, and it is very important not to double count. So I think the form actually provides the space to actually make sure that you specify the sources, and then the DNR team can actually calculate the exact, the commitment amount, taking into account of the double counts. And on the other one, the budget disbursement issue, I think it's a really salient, the issue that we all need to continue to work on after the summit, because summit is a place to, pledge, but if the pledge will be fulfilled or not really matters, especially on the ground, and the budget execution is an issue. And as I presented in the few slides, especially on the other side of the mantra, the budget execution is something that requires, improving budget execution requires the system or mechanism to look at how much actually you have spent. And often in the health sector, health financing, the team actually tries to look at that, but nutrition is only part of that, the analytics. And what we are promoting here and encouraging, and we as stakeholders to be able to support would be to look at nutrition, spending through analytics, so that we know that how much has been spent or how much has not been spent, and where the bottlenecks are, so that the next cycle of budgeting process can improve that, and also improving the distribution of the budget and spending, so that the results are maximized. For those to happen, I think this, as I presented, the system building and capacity building efforts would be needed, including public expenditure reviews, building a system to continuously track and make course corrections during different budget cycles. So those are the areas that we really want to see after the summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is so helpful, really, really helpful. We have 2 more questions in the chat that are from anonymous people that I can't see who they came from. One is about that the coordination process and finalizing commitments tend to take longer in some countries because of the approvals alignment with domestic budget cycles. Can countries still submit commitments after October 30? And then there is another question as well, which we might take at the same time, which is, what if the commitment donor country cannot meet at the end? Is there a possibility that projects or programs under this framework or commitment unfortunately forcibly proceed without listening to the local voice? So I think here also we're happy to hear from GNR colleagues, and then we're very happy to open the raised hand function, and any other questions that might come in, happy to do those verbally, because we have changed the function in the system. So we're now happy to invite everybody to speak. But first, over to you, GNR colleagues.
Can I, yes, I'm going to speak to the timeline of the commitment. 31st of October is a soft deadline for your commitment to be registered, so that we can do a first basic verification. This is very helpful for the organization of the summit. It is really critical for government of Japan to know the breadth of commitments that are coming up. So 2 things on this one. First of all, when you register your commitment, this is not completely final. There are opportunities to complement, add information. And if you manage to fully fill in the form, we will have enough information to be able to report to the government of Japan. So this is the first one. After December, the IG will then start the full analysis and get back and forth with the commitment makers to fine-tune what needs to be fine-tuned. The deadline for commitment makers to register their commitments, if they want their commitment to be counted as part of the year of action, will be the day of the summit. So this will be the final deadline. However, I would like to stress that the nutrition accountability framework goes beyond the nutrition for growth. This framework has been requested and built so that it stays on the long term. Stakeholders who want to make a commitment in January next year will be able to register their commitment, and the GNR will continue the tracking. This is the point of this platform, is that it stays open all the time. So this timeline that we're giving is a timeline for the commitments to be part of the year of action. So 31st of October is a soft deadline so that we can provide some form of analysis to the government of Japan. 7th and 8th of December is the firm deadline for commitments to be included in year of action, and any commitments after absolutely are welcome when stakeholders need more time to formulate them. I will let maybe Renata on the second one, which is what happens if countries can't meet their commitments.
That will become part of the progress assessment. So it's important, I guess, to come up with commitments that are as realistic and feasible as possible. That's also part of the smartness, I guess. So for that, we'll defer to the stakeholder to define what that is for them and in that particular context. From our end, we'll be asking them to report on progress made towards that commitment a year later, basically. So that will become apparent as to whether or not that commitment is being made. Of course, we'll give the opportunity to explain or to provide those risks or challenges at the time as to why that particular commitment could not see the progress that was meant for that particular period of assessment. But this whole process of how the progress will be reported on and assessed will be announced early next year.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful. And since we have now activated, our IT support colleagues have activated the speaking function and the raise hand function that we missed to turn on before. If you want Danish, Isha Danish, if you're willing to take the floor and ask your question in person, that would be great. And then, because I think this is a question that many people are wondering about. Danish, the floor is yours. Okay, just trying to turn on the function. Oh, okay, I'm getting a message that, okay, Danish is raising his hand. Okay, let's see if we're able to sort this one out. Having some IT challenges, unfortunately. It's almost a given when you do a webinar like this. Are we able to sort it out?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Danish, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Actually, there is confusion around the UN Food System Commitment Registry and Nutrition Accountability Forum. Some countries already submitted food-related commitments through UN Food System Registry, and they assume they are not required to submit their commitments again through this GNR mechanism. So could you actually put light on this, and what is the requirement for that? Should countries resubmit their commitment?
The short answer is yes, because for the N4G Summit specifically, and for the Nutrition Accountability Framework,
Okay, that was a very short and clear question. I don't know if there are other points that should be added to that.
No, it looks like Renata is frozen, but yes, the short answer is yes, please. It is necessary to register twice because the Nutrition Accountability Framework is built to then provide tracking of those commitments. So the ambition here is to make sure that all the registration and of the nutrition commitments is centralized through the Nutrition Accountability Framework, and we will leverage existing mechanisms. But yes, please register with the NAF. Renata, I see you're back. You froze.
I don't know what happened there, so I'm not sure. I guess you did answer the question. So the short answer is yes, further because of the requirements in terms of the smartness and the criteria that have been introduced, and that the NAF is an accountability framework that, yes, also supports the registration of the commitments, but that's what its core in the NAF that will allow us to track and report on progress using very specific criteria. The registry for the UNFSS also captures any commitment that is made as part of that food system summit that is currently a registry and not necessarily an accountability function for nutrition commitments specifically, which is what the NAF comes to address. So for nutrition commitments, the recommendation is to register through the NAF as well, to ensure that they are included in the year of action and the N4G, and that they also meet the requirements for smartness.
Renata, an additional supplementary question. Actually, we have noted that the thematic consultations and government procedures are taking too much time to finalize commitments. So can you extend this soft deadline, which is 30th October?
Yes, the deadline, as was mentioned before, there's a soft deadline, which is the October 31st, to allow us and the government of Japan mainly to get a sense of the commitments that are coming through, and to allow us to identify the best possible way to summarize that information as part of the compact, and some minimum level of checking and verification. So the sooner they get submitted, the better it is. However, everyone recognizes that this takes longer. So the hard deadline is the day of the summit for registering your commitment. However, we won't be able to do any checks at that point, but that would still allow for a commitment to be registered and count in the year of action. Any follow-up clarifications will come after the summit by default, of course, but the hard deadline is the day of the summit.
Thank you very much for clarification. Thank you.
So we're getting a lot of questions coming in, which is great. Let me just ask the Sun coordinator, because I know Gerda Verberg is on the call, and she has, we're reached the hour. So I'm wondering, Gerda, if you want to come in now, and then we do additional questions towards the end, because we're happy to stay on longer to do that. If you have to leave, then I'm happy to give the floor to you now, and then we continue the discussion afterwards. Is as you prefer.
Very good. Thank you very much, Marie, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Great to see so many participants here, but I was listening to the presentation, and from time to time, I try to put myself into the shoes of country representatives. And you might think that it's quite a lot of administrative handling and bureaucracy to get your commitment for N4G ready and up there. What I want to say is that it's more than worthwhile to give it a try, because everyone is there. Reach out to CLT or to others to ask for help, because it would be pity that countries will shy away from making a concrete commitment in the run-up to the N4G, but also later, as was explained by the Global Nutrition Report. Don't hesitate. Please create a bridge between the commitments made during the Food System Summit. I was impressed by the number of very concrete pathways that were committed by Sun Movement member countries. And I know that many of you have been extremely active in the country dialogues or in the independent dialogues, but please take the line, make the bridge from the UN Food System Summit towards N4G, and don't hesitate to make commitments. And if you have any question, please reach out to N4G, because they are there, and otherwise use your Sun Movement contacts, because of the commitment making, we should not let this slip through. It's an important moment in time to make concrete commitments for nutrition. And there is a lot of competition for the budget available and for the opportunities available, because the challenges are many, but let's work hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, to get as many clear commitments up before and after the Nutrition for Growth Summit, but preferably before, because then we will do everything to make your government shine in Japan on the 7th and the 8th. Thanks for having me. I will continue to listen in and then indeed slip out at a certain moment. Thank you, Marie. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Gerda. That's so inspiring and reminding us again of what should be at the focus for this discussion if we become too technical sometimes. So that is excellent. So we've had a few more questions that came in, and since we now have the voice function enabled, I'm wondering, there was a question from I cannot see the name, but around identifying commitment areas. If you want to take the floor to ask that yourself, please raise your hand, and then we're happy to have a conversation around it. If it doesn't work for some reason, I'll read it out, but just giving a second if you want to come in and make this question yourself. Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands, so I'll just read it out quickly because I think this is a set of really relevant questions. So the question is around, first, do we have to identify commitments per thematic area? Can our commitments be initial only for the meantime? And also finally, and then submit final commitments by next year. So it's two questions. So do we have to identify commitments per thematic areas, and can commitments be first initial now and then be final next year? So Charlotte or other colleagues, if you want to come in on that one, that would be great.
Sure, I can go first, I guess. So yes, they need to identify for N4G commitments. They need to commitment makers need to identify the thematic area that their commitment aligns with of the 5 that are highlighted in the commitment making guide. And again, this alignment really depends on how the stakeholder or the commitment maker identifies their particular commitment. And in terms of whether or not changes can be made to the commitment down the line, ideally no. So in what sense? Because if some fine tuning, as we've discussed, is possible, but at the same time, we wish to minimize commitments that start off being very, let's say, ambitious, but then they get changed down the line and scaled down. So ideally, the commitment makers should stay true to the original commitment as submitted, I guess, and try to provide as much detail as possible at that stage. We will reach out to this commitment maker to say if that's not enough detail or a little bit more detail is required. Hopefully the form will provide you with all the guidance you need. So the more information you provide right now, the better it is, of course. But if information is missing, it's possible to provide it at a later stage, yes, but without changing the intent of the commitment, I guess. If for example, somebody commits $100 million and then they said, no, it's $20 million for whatever reason. So that's a change in the commitment and the intent, which it's quite different than fine tuning the level of detail. For example, I don't have all the details related to that particular indicator, and I could provide it later on, if that helps answer the question.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. So we have a question also from Ian Russell. Would you like to come in and ask your question yourself and explain it a little bit more? If so, please raise your hand and you'll be given the floor. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Marie. So this is Ian Russell from FAO in Cambodia. And I want to follow up the question that Urshad raised about whether we should ensure that commitments made previously for the Global Summit should be included. And in particular, I want to ask whether commitments that we have under our GAP, our Global Action Plan for Wasting, whether these should also be included. Because initially we were told, or someone advised us not to duplicate them. But I think that might be a mistake when I listen to the purpose for this. So over from me, thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. So JNR colleagues, you have the floor.
Yes, for any nutrition commitments, the recommendation is to register through the platform to facilitate, I guess, the registration of commitments that are smart and will also enable accountability for nutrition. So if you have made, in fact, a commitment, a nutrition-related commitment as part of the Food System Summit, because the Food System Summit goes beyond nutrition commitments, of course. So if you have made a nutrition commitment as part of the summit, and you would like it to count for the N4G Summit, the recommendation is to register it through the the Nutrition Accountability Framework. Similarly, for any nutrition commitment that you would like to be part of this global endeavor to strengthen accountability for nutrition that extends the N4G Summit and goes beyond 2021, I would still urge you to register through the NAF, where the same criteria and the same guidance would be followed. So that's a recommendation, of course. It's not a requirement, but this will allow us to have all nutrition commitments in one place. Over time, the goal of the NAF is to minimize this reporting burden and need, but it will take time. So please bear with us as we're trying to minimize the reporting burden and reporting fatigue across different mechanisms. In the meantime, and specifically for the N4G Summit, please go through the NAF to register your commitment, because Smartness is a requirement for that summit.
Thank you so much for that helpful response. So we have a question from Minarto NS regarding budgets and loans. If you'd like to read out your question in person, please do raise your hand. Oh no, I'm raising my hand myself. That was not my... Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands, so I'll read it out for you. So what do we do with a budget that comes from loans? Should we consider this a government commitment or a bank commitment? So I don't know, Kyoko, if you want to come in first, and then maybe GNR colleagues as well.
Yes, thank you. We have discussed this internally as well. When it comes to the World Bank IDA IBRD resources, these can be considered part of the country commitments, but you still have to say in the registration form that this much is actually coming from IDA IBRD, because we are the World Bank is also globally committing our resources, which is IDA IBRD. So it will be double count. So it has to be specified clearly in the statement of the commitment. And I think it's quite important that to include that, IDA IBRD as part of the country commitment, because the governments are committing to pay back from their domestic revenue later on, the long time, after this, the commitment. But still, it is a commitment that government will pay back. So this is quite significant. In some countries, we have noticed that when they, this shift from IDA to IBRD or shift from grant to IDA, the nutrition is often considered too soft for borrowing. So then those countries fall through the cracks without having enough resources. When they had many grants, they were able to support the programs. But once they, start graduating from grants to IDA, suddenly governments say that, that we don't want to borrow for nutrition. That really put us in jeopardy that we will not make, to achieve the nutrition targets by 2030. So we think it's really important to recognize that governments are borrowing for nutrition outcomes for their future. But again, the registration form, in the registration form, you should be very clear about how much is coming from those resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyoko. That's very helpful. Did you want to come in as well, Renata, or other colleagues from GNR, or did Kyoko cover everything?
Kyoko covered everything.
Excellent. So I see in the chat that we have Karima Alhada. You're raising your hand. Please come in with your question or contribution. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for having me. So in Yemen, we have this conflict context, and the commitments cannot be done by the government because the different resources, especially the finance, is not there. The state budget is zero. So mainly the interventions or the commitment should be in collaboration with the donors and the UN and international organizations in Yemen. So this is my question, that we have developed the multi-sectoral nutrition action plan, and it has been a year and we haven't implemented anything. And it was our Nutrition for Growth commitment in 2013. This was the Yemen's commitment, and we have fulfilled this, and we developed the multi-sector plan. So we would like to build on the previous commitments of Yemen and to go to the second step, which is the implementation of this multi-sectoral plan. So this can be a smart commitment, acceptable commitment to implement the multi-sectoral plan. And during this process, we will need the support of the donors and the UN in Yemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karima, for that question. So both regarding whether implementing the multi-sectoral nutrition plan can be a smart commitment, and also regarding the involvement of donors and UN partners in that commitment. GNR colleagues, would you like to respond to this?
Sure, yes. So of course, any type of implementing a given action would qualify as a commitment, of course. If the costs aren't secured to facilitate or to allow the implementation of that commitment as of right now, that would still be okay, because in some cases it's not possible to have that in place as you're registering your commitment, or you haven't fully estimated the amount that is required, or you don't even wish to disclose that amount for whatever reason. But we need to ensure that that commitment is realistic. So we would really defer to you to determine whether or not that's a realistic commitment, and of course work with whichever agencies or donors are required to allow you to gather the resources that are required. So the form, again, does allow you to provide that information or as much information as you've got right now. So hopefully this facilitates the recording of the commitment and also answers your question. But if you would like more information, please let us know and we can come back to you.
Thank you so much, Renata, for that response. So there is a possibility of also having this follow-up conversation with the colleagues at GNR and the independent expert group. So it's good now that you know their faces. So definitely take advantage of that opportunity. So I see, Safina, that you've raised your hand in the chat. Would you like to come in to make a question or comment? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, this is Safina from Sri Lanka. I just want to build on what the colleague from Yemen raised. Although Sri Lanka is not in emergency in the war state, still COVID-19 disrupted the whole health system, including health financing, right? So the country's debt, which was quite high before COVID, is now 115% of GDP, because country gets loan to procure vaccine, and then the management of that debt is quite expensive. So it is much more than all allocation in social sector. Now, under commitment, we have these financial commitments as well, right? So, and to formulate financial commitments is it's not difficult. It's everyone can formulate them. But then on reality, we know that fiscal space in the country stretch for the next 3-4 years. I just want, I'm challenging all of us also to think about whether something around debt relief or decrease of the debt from the international societies, from these developed countries, is this something could be formulated as a commitment, from donors from those countries who are allocating and giving loans, from World Bank. This is something I think many countries would need to look at, and it's quite difficult question right now in our work when we are trying to develop commitments, because the reality is very constrained. As I said, we analyze the fiscal space of the country. We see that it is impossible to increase further allocations into nutrition sector. We saw that how nutrition essential services has been disrupted. We step in and started supporting those activities which we never supported in Sri Lanka, for example, procuring RUTF, just because the government couldn't afford it anymore. So I just want to understand to which extent we can also work around this sensitive issue, and to which extent we can also, as a country, can raise, perhaps it won't be commitment, maybe question. I don't know how even to raise this question about the possibility of debt relief or decreasing it. But this is something we discussed internally in the country with the government partners. So I hope I was clear. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Afina. I think you're very clear, and I do think that you raise a really important topic. We know that, I mean, we started discussing nutrition for growth before COVID hit us, and that was a very different world in so many ways, not only, I mean, all across the world, but of course, even more for the countries that were already struggling more, so financially. So this is, we know that the fiscal space is smaller. So I will say one thing first, which is that we're very happy to take this question back to the SUN donor network and to colleagues, also donor representatives in the N4G outreach group, to be able to take the feedback back, because this is definitely an area which also is directed to donors, you know, currently thinking about making commitments. But I'll see Kyoko, if you'd like to come in with a response to this from your perspective right now, recognizing that this is not, you know, fully for you to respond to, but happy if you have some thoughts to share.
Right. Okay. Thank you. This is really, you know, just my thoughts, and these things, debt suspension, debt relief, you know, issues are discussed really at the highest level. So I can't really, you know, make myself, you know, in a spot to actually answer your question. But what I understand is that at this point of time, debt suspension could be possible, but debt relief from the World Bank side has to really, you know, be at the top, in highest level decision. And I do understand so many of those countries actually have constraints. But what is really important is, with those, even with those challenges, some countries actually have managed to maintain the budget for nutrition, especially linking with, for example, human capital, you know, agenda. That country needs investment in people when it's the country is facing the most difficult time. Then either IBRD resources are available for, with the really concessional, you know, the conditions. So I think, these debates really have to happen. We would have really hoped to see that happening. When the COVID started, we were very worried at the global level that everybody was rushing for vaccines and, the supplying medical, the equipment, etc. And social protection sector was really, trying, really gearing up the cash, transfer, etc. without nutrition conditions. And nutrition was kind of a refugee in between. So it was not discussed very thoroughly at the table of COVID response. And it will come later as a burden for the country's system and country's human capital. So I think this debate has to be reactivated, re-energized, and it has to reach the highest level possible, taking the opportunity of this summit. So that's what I can say at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyoko. That's very helpful, and also worth repeating that we will really save. I mean, all of the questions that have been made and all the points that have been made, we will also feed back that to the N4G outreach group. We'll feed it back to also the wider constituencies supporting this, so that also, this is flagged and kind of acted on and responded to as much as possible. So we also have a question from, a second question from Nurul Asma from Indonesia. Would you like to come in to raise that question personally? If so, please do raise your hand. Please, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. So I was wondering about the commitment that we have made before in 2013 and 2015. We know that the NAF is quite new, right, this year. So if we are going to make a commitment that was an update from 2013 or 2015, for example, is that mean that the commitment in the previous year going to be quote unquote deleted, and then the one that is going to be tracked and reported to GNR is the one that we are going to make this year in 2021? Thank you.
It's a very good question, because as you've seen, the GNR encourages the strengthening and the learning through the cycle of the process. So for transparency and accountability, it would not be a good practice to delete any previous commitment. So past commitment will continue to be tracked through the Nutrition for Growth commitment tracker. As you say, the Nutrition Accountability Framework is a new process. So we will continue the two processes alongside until the Nutrition for Growth past commitment through the tracker, we finish the tracking of those, and we can completely take over with the Nutrition Accountability Framework. So any new commitment, as well as strengthened commitment from past commitment, should be registered through the Nutrition Accountability Framework.
So can I follow up on that question?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
please
sure.
go ahead.
Thank you. So for example, our commitment was to increase a certain amount, for example. And then this year, our commitment was is kind of going to be changed into at least the same amount is going to be kept and continue into the year after. So that's kind of contradicting from the commitment that we have made before. So does that mean, I guess, we shouldn't submit that commitment this year, and instead, I guess, as a kind of evaluation for the previous commitment? Thank you.
I think it would be best if you would send us your commitment, and then we can directly respond to that so that we can visualize this and see exactly what the question is. But as in principle, I guess, if it's your past commitment would come to an end, let's say in 2020, then that's done. And if you would like to carry on that particular commitment, re-energizing it, putting it again in motion, let's say, and committing the same amount for another period of time, let's say, that would constitute a strengthened commitment. So your past commitment would have its own time frame for completion and for achievement. So if that falls within that original time frame, then that's part of the past commitment. And the new commitment is what would follow, either strengthened or completely new. But in any case, if you feel that that doesn't really answer your question, I would recommend email to us directly what the new commitment or the strengthened commitment you're considering looks like, and then we can take it from there.
Thank you so much for this. And I see that we've reached the time, the hour. It's 12 o'clock now here where I am. So that means that, and I know many of you might have other meetings to go to as well. We're so delighted really for this conversation, to see all the questions coming in, the discussion, and really, really relevant questions. So we will have to close the call now in a few minutes. I'd like to flag just that my colleague Marta has pasted into the chat key resources that will be useful. Many of you have seen them before, but just for ease of reference, they're there also in the chat box. If you have additional questions now, please do paste them into the chat, also indicating your email addresses, and we'll be very happy to follow up directly over email with additional questions and answers. And then, of course, it's also the possibility, if time zones allow, to jump on, for example, the afternoon webinar that is taking place in a few hours. So that is also an opportunity. We're available, the N4G outreach group, to continue to have a dialogue with all of you on this. It's not the end line. This webinar is just a starting point to really have this dialogue with you. So you know now some of the faces, some of the people to ask. We will be sending out a follow-up email to all of you who were on the line with the resources and also with the PowerPoint, as mentioned. And then that will also be an opportunity to follow up and just respond to that if you have additional questions. We work together and try to be really coordinated also as an outreach group collectively so that we bring in the right people. But with this, thank you so much for joining. I know for some of you it's quite late. It's so exciting to see the engagement and the kind of how deeply so many of you are into this process already with such great questions. We will learn from this webinar as well for the others that come. For example, how to manage the IT part of this and how to make it as useful as possible. Thank you so much and wishing you a lovely afternoon and evening. And we continue to be in touch. Thank you.